Hello, welcome to the January 10th, 2023 Club Cubase live stream. I'm going to do a quick audio test and then we will go ahead and begin in just a moment. Bear with me just for a second. Hello, welcome. All right, my audio monitoring computer sounds fine. My name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, and I primarily focus on Steinberg products, and I'll be the host for the live stream today. I'm presenting from Alexandria, Virginia in the United States, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. If you are watching this live or if you're watching on a replay, please feel free to tell us, introduce yourself and tell us who you are and where you're from. So if you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you could submit questions in the live chat field or simply email questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, if we could specify which version of Cubase you're running, whether it's Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, and which version number, so if it's version 10, 11, or 12, and which operating system, that information is helpful. My ability to answer all of the questions in real time will soon be eclipsed. I'll try my best throughout the live stream to catch up. But if you don't see an immediate response to your question, if we could refrain from asking the same question repeatedly over and over again, that would be appreciated. It just kind of slows down the whole process. And if we don't do that, we can get through and get more questions answered from people. We should have all of the topics covered in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field. So look for that several hours after the live stream ends. And those will include timestamps, so you could jump immediately to a particular section of the live stream. If you wanted to search for topics that may have been covered in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com. And Jan from Stockholm has been kind enough to create that website, which is a wonderful resource. I think there's over 23,000 questions that you could search there. We also want to give special thanks to Agent K and to Jazz Dude for serving as moderators. They're not Steinberg employees. They just do it to make it a better community. So we want to thank them for their efforts. Also, we should give a special shout out to Jazz Dude for his work on the Cubase Nation Discord, which is a wonderful resource of information, tutorials, and resources for the Steinberg community. So with that, let's go ahead and begin. All right, so we see Patrick is on. We have Westar just saying Greg and Steinberg are their best. I'll certainly be watching, so glad you could join us. We see Jazz Dude. We have Stefan from Sweden. We have Robbie Bowling from Dallas. We also have Matt Elston from London. We have Benny from Sweden. We have Alexander Plasko. We see Jan from Cubase Index is on. All right, we have Soren from Sweden. All right, we see John Costigan from Kenosha, Wisconsin. We have Val Lee from Vienna. He's watching from a train. It's dedication. All right. All right, so we have Walter Till checking in from Austria. We have Rich checking in from West Palm. Thanks for joining. Okay, so Valley just asks, will there be a morphing plugin on Cubase in the future? There used to be kind of a plugin called Loop Mash that people would often kind of use for morphing. So, if you wanted to... so I'm not sure if you want to morph two sounds together, but one thing that you can do is there is a morph filter plugin that's included with Cubase. So if we wanted to just come over here, let's play this little drum loop here. And if we go to inserts and we look under filter, we can see the morph filter. And this would allow us to kind of morph filters like so, and we could map these to go to different filter shapes. And if you have previous versions of Cubase, there was a plugin called Loop Mash, and that could kind of morph different loops. It's not included in version 12, but there are some ways to get the Cubase 11 synths that you could probably Google to get those to work inside of Cubase 12 if you wanted to. All right, so we have Patrick Becker checking in from Germany. All right, so we have a question from Patrick Emmanuel A. Greg, how to select notes with names like C2, D3, G4 in MIDI logical editor inside key editor, because it's random notes with random things thought out in song. So I need to select notes. Can you show us? All right, so let's say I want to look at these particular notes. Okay, so let's say I wanted to select C4, B flat 3, and F3. So what we could do is let's go to our MIDI menu to Logical Editor. Let's go to Setup. So we want to start from scratch. So we want to say, okay, let's select MIDI notes. And then we will say, okay, where value 1, which is the pitch, is equal to C4. So we'll say value 1, we'll say value 1, and you'll see that will just change the pitch. So let's say all right, and let's say F3. Okay, so now what we want to do is probably to change the Boolean condition. So we want to say we're going to select these notes and we'll say C4 and we'll switch this to or, A#3 or F3. So now when I come over here and hit apply, we could just simply select based on particular pitches. So this way we could just, again, come over here to select, and then we'll say we're going to select MIDI notes that are C4, A#3, F3, and you could just kind of choose those, whatever pitches that you want, just type those in. And it's probably good to put the Boolean condition to or. And then, so now if I wanted to take those notes and take their velocity, and let's say I want to lower the velocity of those particular notes, at that point I would choose transform, and we're going to take those particular notes, and velocity is value 2 in a MIDI note message, and then we could say let's subtract 20. So at this point I could say, okay, let's take those particular notes and subtract their velocity by 20, and we could just go through and do stuff like that as well. So let me know if that's helpful, Patrick. All right, we see that Rich is just getting over COVID in West Palm Beach. We hope it wasn't so bad and that you recover fully and quickly. Sorry to hear that. Okay. All right, so we have Senthan Arumukan sending greetings from Malaysia. Thanks for joining us on the live stream today. Okay, so we have a question from Walter Till. The question is, hi, if I have a folder track where all the tracks, including marker tracks, is it possible to cut this folder track and move the cut it part, including moving the markers? All right, so let's say I have a marker track here. I'll just add a marker track quickly. Okay, so let's put all of that with tracks into a folder track. So we'll just right click and say move selected tracks to new folder. So we have our folder, and let me just throw some events in so that we could see. Okay, so now we have some events within the folder. We'll come over here. So let's go ahead and cut the folder, and I'll say let's move the folder over here. So let's go ahead and expand the folder. So it doesn't look like the marker tracks carried over, but let's try it again. So it looks like the events are carried over, but not the markers. So let's say if I select the markers and move them over, and I'll just hold down now my Alt or Option key, and then so it looks like that the markers may have to be selected independently of the folder, but if they are selected, then we could come over. So now let me try something just out of curiosity. So let's say if I cut this folder, and see if we could set it up with the logical editor preset. Maybe in a project logical editor. So let's see if we could come over here, say we're going to select all the events in the marker track, and let's come over here, and we're going to say position, and I'll just say inside cycle. And let's see if we go property is set to parent object is selected. It doesn't look like that works. Yeah, so it looks like the markers may have to be selected independently of that. Sorry about that. But if you want to email me, I could play around with it and see if I could come up with a solution for Friday's live stream. All right, so we have Brian Dodge checking in from Phoenix, Arizona. All right, so we have from PZ136, happy Tuesday. Can you go over the reactivation process and how to get the new code? Thanks. So maybe if you could let me know, if it is like a soft E license, like from Cubase 11 and earlier, you could, go to the, reactivation process of, from the Steinberg website. If it is if it's going to be Cubase 12 or higher, you would just do it within the, you could remotely deactivate, within from any computer now. So if you could let me know if you're in for PZ136, if you're in Cubase 11 or Cubase 12, that would be helpful. All right, so we have Val Lee just wants people to hit the like button. All right, and we have You Reckon, Dakru, Tree of Life, sending greetings from Israel. All right, we have Alexander sending greetings from Germany. And Fadi from Egypt, thanks for joining us. All right, and we have Young Aliens just checking in. Hello from the Berkshires in Massachusetts, beautiful part of the country. And we have Luciano from Italy joining. All right, so we see from Patrick, Greg, if we use samples and loops, we drag dropped samples, but I want to find the samples inside the loops browser. Is it possible to locate samples? All right, so let's say if I just drag this audio file over. So once it's dragged in, we'll see the name. And then at that point, if you wanted to just search, so when I look at the name of the event that's been dragged over, so I say pad 09 dash C3. So we could, let me just. So once you do that, just type the name in. So even if I wanted to just kind of take this description, copy, and paste in the search field, that you could just kind of find the names just like that. So just kind of do just a quick search here, and then you should be able to kind of find the different pads by name, so you could be able to search directly that way. So just try, if it's been dragged in, you should see the description or the name of the file, and then just search based on that in the media bay. All right, so we have Dwight Saib checking in from Calgary, Alberta. Thanks for joining us. Seems like we have a lot of new people. All right, and we have Altsiva Band checking in from Romania. Thomas from Austria. All right, so You Reckon Dakru is also on a train. So we have two people watching from trains. Hopefully we're making your train journey more enjoyable. All right, we have Calico 22 from Pennsylvania. Lots of family in Pennsylvania. All right, we have Thomas from Bavaria and Uno Memento from Finland. Glad you guys could all make it. Jay Hatchie checking in from Ireland, and Element from Poland. Thanks for being online. All right, so you see a question from John Costigan. What's the best practice to render or export multiple songs recorded on a single pair of files? Guitar, Vox markers, loop markers, or Ranger track? Thanks. All right, so let's say if I had multiple, make sure I have this right, multiple songs recorded on a single pair. So let's say, just go to a particular file here. Sorry for hitting my mic. All right, so let's say if we needed to, this was we had, multiple, recordings here, and we wanted to take different sections. So what I would do is probably use cycle markers. So I would add a marker track. And let's just add a new marker track, and we'll call this cycles. Okay, so I'm going to select my range tool, and let's say this is song 1. I'm going to hit the letter P to set the left and right locators, and then I'm going to insert the cycle marker. So again, letter P, insert cycle marker, and you can make a macro to do that as well. Okay, so say this is all of our pieces. And we wanted to now kind of break those up. All we have to do is when we go to export audio mixdown, we could just choose right here on the export range. So instead of just using locators, we can now say let's export based on the cycle markers. So at this point, we could take this particular recording and I'll just export and we'll create new audio tracks. So I will at this point just export the media. And we could do this for multiple tracks or single tracks. So I'm just doing a stereo mix down here, but if we choose multiple, we could create our multiple stems. So we can see now that each track is automatically split out. Or if you wanted to do stems that were split out, we could also just kind of come here and say, let's get an export audio mix down. Let's choose multiple. I want to take all my audio files. Let's say it's one contiguous recording. And now we will come over here. We'll say we'll create audio files. We'll export our audio mix down. Just let it do all of its number crunching so we can see that now our stems will just be exported and new files will be created based on the length of the cycle markers. I think the cycle markers is probably the best workflow method for doing that, John. So let me know if that's helpful. All right, so we see a question from the Coast Cover Man Nordwick. Sorry for mispronouncing that. I'm sure I butchered it. Hi, Greg. How can I remove the track name in the edit window? So if it's so I'm not sure if it's in the sample editor, where if you wanted to remove like the track name there. So let me just, let's go to, let's say our, and I will just come over here. Let's say I'm going to turn off my regions. So where we see the track name, I know that there is, let me just see if we have, So if we, on the audio in the sample editor, if we just choose to show clips, then we don't see the name. If we have it set to show events, we see the name. If it is a MIDI track, what we could do, it's handled slightly differently for MIDI tracks. So let's say if I have my MIDI track here, and we want to get rid of the borders, you'll see this little icon right here. So where we see this name. So let me know, and then you could hide that so it's not covering any like the names on the rulers themselves. So let me know if that's the name that you want to get rid of. So if that's a name you want to get rid of in the edit window. All right, so we see, hi Greg, I'm using Nuendo 12. Is there a way to keep the stereo track as stereo interleaved when importing AAF? So sometimes, some programs may automatically split the file as AAF, but if it is a interleaved file, if you go to preferences, and then go to editing to audio, we could just say on import audio files, make sure that you don't have split channels selected there. So, but you should be able to just export, you should be able to import if the file was actually stereo interleaved, and you realize that some programs may automatically turn the stereo interleaved file into AAF. So let me just see if we take just a stereo project, and if we export it as AAF. So let me just find, I think I have a 2-track. All right, so I'm going to take this and let's go to my preferences, and we'll make sure that split channels isn't selected. So now I want to export AAF file. I'll just do new project here. Yeah, so it looks like maybe the AAFs are automatically going to split it into mono files. So AAFs may not carry interleaved files, it looks like. So it may be just a limitation of AAF. But if you have two files that were split, so let's say if we come to, so if we go to edit, or project and convert tracks, we'll say multi-channel to mono. So I'm going to select the track this time. That would help. So if you wanted to, after it's exported, and then we come over here, we could now choose to take those particular files and go to project to convert tracks and say mono to multi-channel, and that could turn them into stereo. So we'll just again come. So it looks like AAF doesn't handle stereo interlead files, which is why it's going to be split. So again, just come here. We just select just the tracks instead of the events. But it looks like AAF isn't going to handle stereo interlead files. So sorry about that. Sorry, my chat field jumped to me. All right. So just see from Brian Dodge, question: when performing pitch correction with VariAudio, I'm not hearing the audio from each pitch when selecting the correct pitch. Is there a setting I need to adjust? So probably what you want to do is to make sure you have there's like an acoustic feedback on. So let's say if I'm in VariAudio, and we'll just make this kind of full screen here. All right, so if I'm kind of moving and we're not hearing the pitch, make sure that you have this icon, the acoustic feedback, turned on. So if that's not on, also that when you adjust it, that's going to be going through the control room, through the listen bus. So what you want to do is to come over and make sure that, on your outputs, we have it selected as not connected, and we go to the control room, that we have the monitoring path there. But often what it is just going to be turn this icon on, and then then you can hear the changes as you make edits within VariAudio. All right, so you see Michael Pierce, just wishing everyone, saying hello to everyone. He's recording live audio engineer here back in the studio today. So it's good. We're glad you could join us, Michael. All right, so we have a question. When I render my hi-hats with Arpeggiator, they get out of sync. Why is that? So let's go ahead and give it a shot. It could be maybe that if the hi-hats aren't quantized, and let's say you apply arpeggios to them, that maybe as it gets out of time, it could lead for the different elements to be out of time. So let's say if I wanted to just paint in some hi-hats on this, we'll give it a shot. Okay, so let's say I'll just put in hi-hat here, and I want this to be set this to whole notes. Okay, so as we play this, we will now just hear just a hi-hats on the downbeat. All right, so let's go ahead and put on an Arpeggiator. So we'll come here to our MIDI inserts. Okay, so all right, so here I'll just okay, so say I'll put Arpeggiator on. So now what is just our arpeggio that's being driven. So now I will go ahead and render this. So we'll go to MIDI and freeze MIDI modifiers. So now but if these notes were perhaps just slightly out of time, and I did something kind of very similar, and now I render this. So a little out, and let's say these are going to be a little late. So make sure that the actual, like, hi-hats that you put were kind of quantized to the particular beat. So now that they're quantized and we go to the freeze MIDI modifiers, everything will be perfectly in time. But again, if it's a little out, one of the notes is early or late, those arpeggiators are triggered will also be early and late as well. You may not notice it until the arpeggiator has been generated. So let me know if I did something differently than you did. All right, so we have a question from Dwight. Can you please show me how to set the bit sample rate as a default every time I start a new project? So if you go to the project setup, we could see the sample rate and bit depth directly here. So we could do that from hitting Shift plus the letter S, or if you go to project setup, like Shift plus S for setup, and then we could just simply set that. Now, if you want it to be the same way every single time, once you have that set, go to your file menu and save as template, and then you could start the template and have those settings automatically applied every single time you start a project. But it should automatically retain its settings until it's changed again, but that's going to be done in the project setup. So project menu to project setup, or Shift plus the letter S for setup. And you could set the sample rate, bit depth directly there. All right, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Is it possible to lock each Groove Agent pad to individual output that I've set up? So while searching presets, the pad's output doesn't revert back to the default master output. I don't know of a way, but let's go ahead and see if we could get that set up. So, so let me just revert this. Okay, so I'll just drag a pattern over. And let's go ahead and adjust the outputs here. Okay, so let's say we have our multiple outputs here, and let me just load a kit. So I think when we get a loaded kit that it might automatically maintain, like those settings are contained within a kit. So let's say if I come here, let me just okay, so let me just do this and not switch to different style kits. Yeah, so within the kit itself, it's kind of saved. Now, I know you probably want to do this globally, but let's say if I have my snare going out of output 3, and I have this, I think if we come over to, let's say, our snare, that I could select that. So we see our snare is going out of output 3, and let me search for different instruments. So let's say if I now go to a different snare drum for this pad, so let's say we're going to go to snare drum and I'm just going to try from here. Yeah, so I don't know of a way to lock the outputs because each different preset that you load up is going to have the same, is a combination of, because most of it's going to be multi-mic so that your snare is going out of multiple destinations. So I don't know a way to lock it, but I'll pass that along as a feature suggestion. So sorry about that. See, Benny says this stream is the best on YouTube, so that's good. Glad you feel that way. All right, so I have a question. Hi, Greg. I want to add a flanger to only one section of my audio. I would like to commit this to the WAV file itself. Is there a way to do that without affecting the rest of the track? All right, so let's say I have just a drum loop here, and I want to do a flanger on, let's say, beat 3. So I'll just set this to, so I'm going to just come here, select beat 3. So all you have to do, and I'll just put this in the loop so you can hear it better. So I'm just going to grab my range selection tool, select the range, and go to audio to plugins. And I'll just say, let's run it through like a flanger just on beat 3. So then that's just processed directly onto the file. So if I say, okay, I want to take this beat and reverse it, and let's say beat 4, I wanted to add another plugin, just come right over here and say, okay, I just want to add like, so just select it, go to audio, and you could access this window from direct offline processing, hitting F7, or just go to audio, and then you could just, whatever selection, go to plugins, and then you could process that particular plugin. And the beauty of this is I could say, oh, I didn't like the reverse. I could remove one of those steps independently. So the reverse is gone. So we have our flanger. Now let's say the reverb. Let's say if I wanted to tweak the reverb and just browse through different presets. So say, okay, I could change it, modify my different effect settings, or if at any time the original file is preserved, and I could just choose to delete all. So select the range that you want, go to audio, to plugins, and just process the plugin. And you could just write it directly into the file, directly on the file. All right, so we have Arif checking in from Holland. Thanks for joining us today. Wonderful to have Graham Witcher on. Glad you can make it back. We hope you're getting settled into your new studio, your new house. All right, so we have from Dalsaru, if the level is increased by 3 dB by pan law, when you put it back to mono, will the level automatically go down? So yeah, it is when you're adjusting the pan law, and again, we can do that in your project setup, that's not really going to affect mono sources, but will kind of attenuate the volume levels for stereo sources as they're panned across the spectrum to see if it's going to be louder when the sounds are doubled, or if you wanted to compensate for that. So it's not going to have any impact on your mono sources. All right, so we have a question from Patrick. Greg, what's your thoughts on music as business? Some artists, great composers, are still not much rich. Should we choose great music or lots of money? Which one should I be? I'm wondering. I think you should do both. Why not? I think at the end of the day, I came up as a musician, so I would want to always have good work that could hold up over the test of time, and tracks that would sound good 20 years ago, 30 years ago would still sound good. And so I think that a lot of times if you're clever, that your good music can make you money. It may not be so apparent and so quick, but in the long run, like I have friends that do, consistent, who make really good livings doing music for libraries, and they're very consistent and they have a lot of work done. And, different, like people that search out for, like music supervisors know that they could go to this person and that they're going to find quality work that they don't have to sit there and fuss around with. And because they do quality work, that they get more money as a result of that. So, but I'm not a famous musician by any means, so I may not be the best person to ask. We often joke, that I'm in a whole industry, kind of like music instruments that are, it's a whole industry of failed musicians. So, all right, wonderful to see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas. I believe virtual ice cream will start. All right, we have Chris Hallam from Athens, Georgia. Thanks for joining us. All right, so John Costigan says everyone should listen to Michael Teams and hit the like button. Otherwise, he's going to send Texas compost ice cream to John Costigan, and that's not what John wants, apparently. All right, so I just see a question. Is it possible to insert a time-based gap between two parts of projects? So let's say, all right, so I think we could do this kind of utilizing the range tool. So let's say if I have this project here, all right, and I'm going to hold down Control. I'm going to grab my range tool and hold down Control and Shift. So let's say I selected a range of time. So just with my range tool, so Control or Command plus Shift and kind of drag with the range tool. And now we could come over, go to Edit to Range, and then you could just insert silence. So everything will move over, including tempo track, all that different information. So if we had, let's say, duplicated, I could, again, just with the range tool, hold down Control or Command plus Shift. That will globally select. So if I want that much of a gap, go to Edit to Range, and then we'll just say Insert Silence. And then we could just put a specified amount of time. And if you wanted to say, I need exactly 2 seconds of space, something that you could do also is, let's say I have these particular files. All right, so if I select all of these files and I wanted to put, let's say, 2 seconds of space between them, what you could do is go to Edit to Functions, and there's a set spacer between selected events, and I'll say 2 seconds. And then that will automatically just put a 2-second pause between the different tracks. So again, you go to Edit to Functions and set spacer between selected events. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, so we have John Kelber checking in from South Africa, or Johan Kelber, I'm sorry. Thanks for being on. All right, so we see from PZ136, so we see Reactivation 1 is for the UR824 Basic FX, and the other is for Amped Electra. So let's say if I wanted to, for the UR824, since that's a software-based e-licenser, we could just kind of come over here and say, I just want to, let me just close out. So we'll say software reactivation Steinberg soft e-license. So if you come here, there's this Help Center article for that. And then you could just simply come right over here, and this is kind of the process. So just Google software license reactivation. That would be for the UR824. With your Amped Electra, check the Steinberg Activation Manager, and you could just simply, check there to see if it's been activated. And you could check in your My Steinberg account, and you could see what particular licenses within your My Steinberg account, if you go to your profile, that you could access, and what is in your account already. All right, just reading through comments. All right, so we have Tata Digital Studio. Great to see you back. He's checking in from Finland. All right, so you see from Dwight Seib, what bass did you use with settings on the song a long, long time ago? I heard it in the last session. It was very well done. So my main bass that I play is a Warwick fretless Corvette with active electronics. So I'll just play a little bit of it so you could hear it. And it's straight into, I have an AXR, Steinberg AXR 4U interface. So I think I just recorded it directly into that. So let's say, well, do you recall the day we and round strings on it. On our yellow coach to ferry us home. You look my way. And I don't think that there's just a little bit of low end roll off, a little bump in the mid range, but that's the only processing that's on that particular track. So if you want to just bring that out a little bit using. Hear it a little better. So it's just really the bass directly into the interface. I have all sorts of bass preamps. I have a nice collection of bass preamps, but I just tend to, when I record, just go straight right into the interface. So I have to say that I really do like the Warwick German-built Corvettes. I have 3 of them. I have a fretless. I have one with 2 single coil pickups and one with 2 humbuckers, and I just think they work out really well. I've been very happy, but thank you for the kind words on the recording. All right, so we see from Patrick, Greg, even though if I do some great music, I decided to dedicate my entire life to music and keep on doing, but if no one recognizes me, I'm not earning enough. What should I do? Do any composers came across? So, everyone was in that position at one point in time. And, there's every classic story of someone making it is they were ready when the opportunity came. And it could be like in studio engineering world, it's always like, oh, someone got sick and then they the assistant filled in. And, everything worked great with the assistant. So, they're just going to keep working with that guy because they feel comfortable with that person. So, just try to, and I still know like amazing songwriters, like Stevie Wonder still writes a new song every day because he has to write. So, just get try to grow all the time and, but you have to, at a certain point, you have to do like some networking. There's a lot of good organizations. I don't think you live in the United States. I think it's India, if I remember correctly. But in the U.S., there's like Society of Composers and Lyricists is a great organization. There's a group Taxi that allows people to, figure out how to kind of network. So being able to network and meet people that you have opportunities, I think is really important. Like when I was in college, I didn't figure out why we were kind of in the same building with, the video people and the dance people and the fine arts people, and realize that when we figured out how to work together, that, the video people and the audio people and musicians, once they figured out how to communicate and work together, that, that was the genius part of, the college experience for the first couple of years when we're all in the same building, is that we met these different people and figured out how to work with them and how to network with them. So, just kind of keep at it, keep writing, and do stuff for libraries as well. So lots of composers I know, we had Mark Roos on one of our Zoom social meetups last year. And, and when he talks, it's really interesting because he's like, half-hour reality show will have 60 different music cues in it. And he's like, and he was like, 67% of ASCAP royalty payments are for TV shows, so it's like stuff like that you don't necessarily, it may not be as glamorous, but you can make a great living doing, if you look at a typical reality show like we have in America, there's tons of little music clips that are in there. So if you're able to kind of get those into libraries and develop relationships with, music supervisors, that could be a great way to make a living. All right, so we see from John Costigan, thanks, Greg, for the cycle marker tip. Will it name the new tracks if I name the loops? So what you can do if you are working on the particular loops, so let's say we have these here. So let's say when we go to the naming convention, so let's go to your export audio mixdown. So right here, you'll see kind of, so when we do kind of an export multiple, you'll see name and you'll see settings. So here we could say, I want to contain, and I'm just going to activate, like let's say our cycle markers here. Let me just activate this project. Okay, so now that we have cycle markers, and we can say my name now, we could include the cycle marker. So if we come over here, we could just say, okay, not only can I have the name of the track, but I could have the cycle marker name. And then I could put in free text. So your free text could be, John Costigan, whatever you want it to put in. But you can include the cycle marker name in addition to the name. So and again, just when you activate the cycle markers and you have cycle markers, click on this little settings cogwheel for the setup for the naming scheme, and then just add cycle markers right there. Then the cycle marker names can be included within the audio files. All right, so I just see it would be great if we could resize the edit window. So if we're in a MIDI editor, we could, if it's in a lower zone, you could resize it. If we take it to its own dedicated window, this could also be resized, however, whatever size you want. So those will automatically so the different editor windows can be resized. So let me know if that's what you mean. All right, so we see Tim Weinheimer on from Mission Viejo. Thanks for joining. Great to see you on. My chat field jumped. Just finding my spot. Sorry. Okay, I think I'm close. Okay, so we see from Ron Sorbo, Greg, I'm working with video. Say at 37 seconds, I need that time to be bar 1 of a new cue. How is that done? Okay, so let's say we'll just do new project. And let me just import a video file. Okay, so we'll add a ruler track here. And let's set this to seconds. All right, so I'll just say, okay, let's get to 37 seconds. All right, so we want that to be bar 1. And I did do kind of a whole video going through like every possible offset that was posted on the Cubase YouTube channel. But let's see if we could figure this out. So let's get to our project setup and say our project start time. Just say 37. All right, so we modified the timecode offset. Do you want to keep the project content at its time position? So let's say no. So now measure 1 starts at 37 seconds. So if we go to our timecode, so let's just look at Studio, and let's get to our time display. So we go to measure 1. We'll see that measure 1 is 30 seconds. So again, go to your project setup, and you can open that from the project menu, or hit Shift plus S, and you say project start time 30, and just type in 37 seconds, and then measure 1 will start at 37 seconds. So let me know if that's helpful, Ron. Great to see you on. So we see a question. How do I add automation parameters from inserts without having to record a tiny bit of automation on empty space first? Is there a quicker way to find the last used parameter? All right, so let's say I have this track and I have an insert. All right, so let's say I want to go to Grungelizer here. So if I right click on a parameter, we could say show this particular parameter automation track, and that will automatically just show that. So let's say if I want to go to dynamics, and let's go to Squasher. And now as we open up Squasher, I just want to, so this is a VST3 function. So I can say, just come right here and show ratio down. Let's say I'll go to ratio down 3 automation track, and then that will automatically show. So it is part of the VST3 specification. If your plugin doesn't do that, it's how the plugin, if they fully implemented VST3, but again, it's just coming over and right-clicking on the parameter and show the automation track, and that's all you have to do. So if your third-party plugin doesn't do that, contact the third-party plugin developer and ask them to implement that function because it's part of the VST3 specification. All right, so we see from Walter Till, is it possible to synchronize the zoom from the project window and editor when it's in the lower zone? So we could do it with MIDI parts. So let's say if I wanted to go back to this project, but not with audio samples, not with the sample editor. So let's say if we double click here and we see this little icon here, these three, almost like a chain that will link the project in lower zone. So as we zoom in on one, the MIDI will immediately be edited, but I don't think that there is the equivalent in the for the sample editor. But for the MIDI editor, just make sure that this icon is enabled, and then as we zoom in one, the other one will zoom in sync with it. All right, so we see from Patrick Emmanuel A. Greg, is it possible to tell Cubase automatically detect what automate panel? I touch Cube. I recognize things because for some plugins I need to go select things inside the panel. So I'm not sure if it's kind of with the, with the particular, plugin parameters that we just went through, Patrick, but if it's that and if the plugin doesn't do that, it's a limitation of the plugin. So, but let me know if I misunderstood. All right. So we see question. In Nuendo 12, is there a way to rearrange the sends, meaning I can drag send 4 to send 1? So, realize that when we have, let's say if we do multiple effect sends, so I'll just add some effects channels here. All right. And let me just come over here. We'll add one more. All right, so let's say if we go to our mix console here and I wanted to take all of my sends. So let's say we're going to take this, and what I want to do, let's say I have these configured. I'm going to activate the quick link. All right, so let's say now I want my verb to be added to all of those. I wanted my delay added to all of those. And let's say, okay, let's do a chorus. And let's do rotary speaker. So let's say I want the rotary speaker to be in slot 1 for all of the, so I could select all the channels, make sure that Q-Link is active. So let's come here and just move the rotary to that particular send. So, it's not necessarily fixed because you could have 20 different effect sends or effects return channels. And each of those effects return channels, is they don't, it's not like send one, we could have two different, so I could have it be a rotary here, but on this track I may want it to be a coarse. So even though send one could send to any of the different plugins, but if you wanted to, say I want the reverb that's in aux send 4 in send 1 is just to select the tracks. Enable Q-Link. So as we do this, we'll just turn on like Alt or Option plus Shift, and then we can say, okay, I want reverb, the verb on send 1, and once you activate Q-Link and change one of them, they'll all change to that particular one. So, and let's say if I want to do stereo delay on send 1, I come here and say we do stereo delay, and then I want this to be verb on send 2. So just change it using the Q-Link, and I think you could do it pretty quickly that way. But send 1 isn't necessarily always going to be dedicated to the same particular effect. So it's a little more flexible than that. All right, so we see a question. Hi, I'm a newbie to Cubase. When creating a drum beat in the editor window, how do I listen to just a bar I'm working on without highlighting and looping the bar in the main window? All right, so let's do just, so I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so let's say I have my window here, so I'm going to create just a 1-bar pattern. And then what I want to do is just to put this, so we could just kind of set our loop directly here, and we could have even kind of a local loop if we wanted to. So let's say, so even while I'm doing this, let me just, there's an independent track loop. So if we go to the settings cogwheel here, we could go to the independent track loop. And then once we enable that, let me just find, so we see this icon here. All right, so now what I want to do, so I'm just going to click. So now we have the independent track loop enabled. So let's say while this is playing, so say I want this loop to repeat 2 measures. This is just going to repeat 1 bar. And I could at this point just say, okay, I want it to program just, and I'll unmute this. So as soon as we do this now, we could just say, okay. And so now we can see that this is looping 2 measures, and that now, so if I just want to paint in, So we have two measures repeating here, and then two measures. So if I wanted this to now, so we have one measure looping there. And if we take this loop off, so say, and I still have this editor window open, my project will continue to play on. And now I could have everything just kind of programmed directly there. So make sure that you actually have your independent track loop enabled, and then at that point you could just simply have a separate loop for the drum editor independent of the project window. All right, so we see question, are there any rules for the comp tool in lanes? I've recorded 24 audio tracks in lanes. They are all in one folder, and the group is on, but sometimes I can choose between the takes and the lanes, and sometimes it works only with one audio track. All right, so let me just jump over to project here. See if I have it. Okay, let's say if we go here. Okay, so generally if you're using the comp tool, it's going to be kind of on, and I'll just go ahead and I'll duplicate this particular track. Okay, so let me just activate the project first. That would help. Okay, so now we'll duplicate this track. So generally when we are working with lanes, we could think of lanes, and we're using the comp tool, that this would often be applied to, to both, so we have one track, and now if I select my comp tool, I could come over and comp the different parts. Now, if I wanted to comp multiple parts together, what I could do is, let's say I'll close the lanes here, and let me just undo those edits that I've done. So right now, if I wanted to look at this, we'll see what we could do is take these multiple tracks, and then let's assign these to a folder. And then we could apply group editing. So now, as I would do an edit on one of them, it's going to be applied to both tracks simultaneously. So generally we could think of this as one event that's going to sound on the track, but if you wanted to do comping across multiple tracks, put it into a folder and enable group editing. And then as we do this, I make a comp change. Like, see, I change it here in the bottom. It's going to reflect onto both tracks like so. So if I say, okay, let's adjust the boundary here. So that way the same comping is applied to multiple tracks. So let me know if that's helpful. That was Alexander from Germany. All right, so John Costigan says, hello, passengers. This is your like button reminder. Your captain today is Greg Undo. So, all right. All right, so we have Bruce checking in. He's a little bit late, but he did hit the like button on the way. So Michael Teams wants people to smash the like button. So you see Greg from Patrick. Question, Greg, I wonder what Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Tchaikovsky would have done if they had Cubase with MIDI. Have you ever dreamed about this? Or if they lived right now with us, would they be successful? I think that they would have a lot more work that was captured. I remember getting, there's a kind of a famous YouTube piano personality, Nari Soul, and I got, Hans Zimmer reached out to me to give her some Cubase lessons. So, And she does, like, if you haven't checked out any of her piano videos, they're fabulous, really wonderful. It's like, how would these 16 composers play Happy Birthday, or different stuff like that. Really, really wonderful videos. And we got into this discussion of, think how many pieces Bach just didn't have time to write down. He could have been one of the, Bach may have been better at music than anyone, better at music than anyone is at anything else in the world. And think if he could have just captured all of his work, would you have had 100 times more pieces that were, his part of his legacy? He has they have such broad portfolios. But I think, and for them to be able to hear, I remember my orchestral director in college, who was like a lead trumpet player under Toscanini in the NBC Radio Orchestra, like a real heavy duty classical guy and a wonderful conductor. And, one lesson he always implored to us as we were rehearsing was, like, this composer probably never heard, they may have heard their piece performed 3 or 4 times if they were lucky. And how many composers never really heard their piece actually performed well. So it was our responsibility to work hard so that we could perform the piece well to honor their, the composer's dedication. So I think, that's a great concept to always live by. But I think we would have so much more of their work that we could all enjoy and be able to learn so much more if they could have captured it faster and easier using a tool like Cubase. Okay. All right, we see Uno Momento. It's they have -8 degrees centigrade today and windy and snow in Finland. All right. So we see, Greg, what's the best way to create the title and subtitles of a score project? For example, 8 different score parts with the same titles instead of naming every one when you print export them. All right. So let me just come over, take a look. See if I still have it in my recent projects. All right, let me just take a look at it. See if I can just open up project real quick. All right, so let's take a look at like a notation example here. And thanks for all the wonderful questions. If you do, if you have learned something new, make sure you hit the like button and that you subscribe to the channel. And also tell your friends, if they're not Cubase users, what we're doing and how we're able to help people. All right, so let's say we want to look at our violin 1 in our notation view. So I think if we just... So I think we could, let me just go to text and we'll just say, all right, and let me just... All right, so let's... All right, so let's say we just wanted to come here. So I think that we could, and I haven't done this in a long time, but we could put this on kind of a layer. So I'm trying to remember if this is the right way to do it. Let me. Okay, so let's say if we come over here to font settings. But I think that there is a way, so let's say. All right, so let's say I have the text and I wanted that to also be in layout for violin 2. So let me just come over and open up violin 2 in the score editor. Sorry, if I hit the right keys, that would help. But there is a way, and I could, let me see if we come over here, to have that kind of be, not on the note layer, but let's say the project layer. Okay, so. I think if we come over, all right, so now let's say if I go to bassoon, but I think we could assign it at the project layer so you don't have to always put in the text. I'll make a note to just kind of show that for Friday's live stream. But I think if you put it at the project level, that on the project layer, that will do the trick. I'll play around with it more so you don't have to watch me have a brain cramp. All right. All right. So we see from Patrick, Greg, what unknown features that we have never thought of about on MIDI logical editor can you share with us, or get surprised when you first know it's possible with the MIDI logical editor? Let me see. I mean, to me, it's, I think, try to think of anything that kind of jumps out as an unknown. I mean, to me, a lot of times it's like, stuff is kind of set up. One of the things that's kind of interesting to do, and I'm going to forget how to do this, but let's say I have a little phrase here, and I'll just, here, I won't mess up. So let's say if I wanted to take these particular notes, let's get to the logical editor. So we're going to take notes, and let's take value 1. And then I think if you do mirror, and let's say mirror, I'm going to type in 64. Let's see. But there are some ways of like doing like inverted retrogrades. So let's see. Just find something that's a little more. But there are like some interesting things you could do with kind of the mirroring function. Transpose to scale. But let's say if I wanted to take these, and I'll just, let's see if this is kind of doing. So let's say if I take like these particular notes, I could say mirror. And let's say I want to do C2. Like we could just take those particular notes, and let me just see if we can. So running that logical editor again. So there's some clever like I had to for like someone wanted like a inverted retrograde of their particular. Let me just see if this. So we could see. Let's see if I set it to 0 here. And if we just do a mirror, so we see that kind of the dynamic contours of that particular piece. And I'll hit apply. So this way we could actually kind of, do different kind of more compositional techniques. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's hard to come up with something that's unknown to think of off the top of my head. So Michael Team says Greg is famous. I always feel like an Oompa Loompa in a world of Willy Wonkas. So, all right, wonderful to see Nick, and he wants people to whack the like button. And we see Pablo has made it today. So I really enjoyed your drum part you did on Gareth's tune, Nanana, if that's how it's pronounced. But wonderful drum part, Pablo. Nice to play with you again virtually. Pablo is wishing everyone a happy new year. Thanks for joining us. All right. So we see from Robert Higgins, Cubase 12 Pro import from audio from video file. It's an AAC audio file from the video. Nothing happens. It does not import the audio. So you may have to actually convert it from an AAC file into a particular to a different file format. And there's different codecs and containers. And if you look at video support, and what you want to do is convert the video file, and there's a number of freeware utilities where you could actually see where you want it to be for the container and the codecs to match. So just do something other than an AAC file. A lot of times the AAC videos can have like variable frame rates and stuff like that. So sometimes it's 10 frames a second, sometimes it's 30 frames a second, sometimes it's 24 frames a second. So that could be problematic. Okay, so we have a question. This is possibly an absolute beginner question, but how do you set up effects channels and send audio from other channels to them? All right, great question. So let's come over. And I'll just jump to this project. All right. So let's say we want to add an effects channel and send those tracks to them. So I'm going to, we'll revert this. Okay, so what we want to do first is to add an effects channel track. So I'll just come to the bottom here. Let's add track, add effects channel. So I want this to be, let's say, reverb. So let's do like a plate reverb. Okay, so right now we have our effects. All right, let me just start from scratch here, just make sure. All right, so now we have this dry, so I'm going to add an effects channel. So I'm just going to just say add effects channel. And let's say I want this to be my reverb. Now that I have that reverb, let's say I want to take my snare. I will come over here to sends. And let's just activate. We just tell it we want it to go to the reverb, turn it on. So now if I wanted to take less bounce between the snare and the track, so we can have less reverb blended in. So if I wanted to go to, let's say, my kick track and send that to the reverb, I go to the sends, activate the reverb, and now we could resolo. So any track that you want. Now, if you wanted to do this kind of even faster, let's say, okay, I want to add a reverb to a number of different tracks. All you have to do is hold down shift. You could select the tracks and say add an effects channel. And now I could add a reverb to all of the tracks. So when we go to our sends, that we will have our reverb send automatically created for us, and all those tracks have been routed to it. So if you want to take multiple tracks and send it to the reverb, just right click, add track, and add effects channel to selected channels, and that will do the routing for you. If you just add an effects channel, then you could manually add it in as well. So, but great question, and welcome to the live stream. All right, so we have a question. How do I change the tempo of an audio to match when I up the tempo or down my tempo? Okay, so let's say we have our audio here. All right. So if we have our audio that's been recorded, it will be tempo stamped based on the tempo that you have here. So I'm going to select all of my files, and we want to make sure that all of the files are in musical mode. So we see musical mode right here. So now that we have those into musical mode, we're at 100 beats a minute. Now I could just type in a different tempo. So let's say 90. Or I want it to be 112. And then, so once you have the tracks in musical mode, you could just type in new tempos. And then the tracks will kind of almost be like tempo parasites, if you will. So place the tracks into musical mode and then change the tempo, and then you should be all set. All right. So I see question from Robert Higgins. I imported a stereo file. How do I pan independently left from right channels or make the stereo file to mono files? Okay, so let's come over here. I'll activate this project. So we have a stereo track. So there's two different types of panners. So let's say we have our stereo track here. And let's go to, so we can pan kind of a balance panner. So as I go to my left channel, to my right channel. Now if I just wanted to hold down Control or Command and click in the center, we could do that. But we see that when we hover over this area, we get a little drop down menu. And here we can do a stereo combined panner. So this way I could kind of pan within the stereo spectrum. So if I wanted to be very narrow, or if I wanted to actually kind of flip the panning. So again, just kind of come. So this way we could kind of set the panning independently for each of the channels. So if you wanted to be more focused or wider, or more focused and panned over to the right or left, you could do it just like that. Now, if we have the track selected, if you wanted to split it into two mono files, go to your project menu and choose convert tracks and say multi-channel from stereo, and then you'll have two mono files. But I think you could get all the same panning options if you just switched to the stereo combined panner. And you could pick in preferences which is the default panner for tracks. See, Michael Pierce says, oh, revelation of the day, adding space between events. All right. And Michael Team says his revelation today was the insert of a plugin on part of a track. Yes, the range tool. So many good things you could do with the range tool. Everyone's happy to see Pablo on. See, Val says Greg plays fretless and round wound. Nice. I like round wounds. So. All right, so we have a question. Cubase Pro 12. I'm not a pro, so my question. If I open a maybe a few month old project, I realize that the tempo or the tone changed, and I don't know why and how I can fix it. Thanks. So it could be often, when that happens, it could be that, my first guess would be if you go to the project window, to the project setup, look at the audio file, and you'll see in this little line here, this little info line, you'll see the record format of the particular audio file here. So we can see that the sample rate is 24-bit 44.1. Make sure that your project, if you go to project menu to project setup, that your project is currently playing back at the same sample rate as the audio file. So my guess it would be that the sample rate had changed. Maybe you changed the sample rate for a different project and you load it up. It's still in the older project sample rate. That would be the first thing I would look for. Pablo says he likes that bass sound, so that's good. I would hate to have the drummer I record with not like my bass sound. So, all right. So we see from Patrick, Greg, is it possible to automate metronome click pattern? I have a 6/16 pattern. I need to change pattern for some cue. Can I do that? I want second beat silence into 4-bar and then fourth on some. Show us. Okay. So let's say I'm going to add a signature track. So we'll just right click and let's add a signature track. Right, so I'm going to just mute this and let's say, okay, my signature is in 4/4. So once I select the event, we see a click pattern. I could double click on the click pattern. So let's say, okay, I want 4/4 for 2 measures. And then after 2 measures, I want it to be, and now I could just double click here and say, okay, we want this to be a different click pattern. So I'll just say I want this to be 4/4 as 6/8. So we listen to our click. All right, so let's say I wanted to have a 6/16 measure. So let's come here. So at this point, we could have our 6/16ths. So when we come here, we could say, okay, let's have 6/16 time signature. And if I don't want to hear, excuse me, just gonna clear my throat. And if I don't want to hear a particular pulse, I could just say, okay, I don't want to hear like the second pulse here. So as we play, and let's say, okay, I'm going to put in 6/16 here. And I want to come here. Let's, and if I wanted to make my own pattern, we could do stuff like that. So now if I wanted to change my 6/16 patterns to, so let's say, okay, now I want this to be 4/4. So we can just, and let's say, like, we don't want to kill the violins at a particular tempo. So we could say, okay, let's do half tempo. So if we wanted to get a cut time for those 2 bars, and let's go back to our 4/4. So when you come over to transport, you could go to the metronome setup, and then you could have all of your different click patterns, and you could create your own click patterns for different meters, just like that. So as soon as you do that, then we could just say, okay, I want it to be typical 4/4. I want it 4/4, but to be metered as 6/8, 6/16, different 6/16 pattern, say 4/4, let's get a half time. and back to 4/4. So that way you could have the different click tracks automatically be fed to musicians as you see fit. So very flexible. All right, great, wonderful to see Mike Rivera on. You see Jazz Dude is also mentioning that he likes the fretless bass patch VX in Howling and Sonic SE. So yeah, I've used that on some projects as well. But since I play so badly, my keyboard skills are so bad, I'll just usually play a bass part in. See, Benny says that this live stream is his date. All right. All right, wonderful to see Tiago on. And then he's on vacation in Tremendi Beach. Sounds nice. Looking at some vacation spots for spring break for myself. All right. You see Michael Pierce has a Google meeting. He's going to try to drop back. All right, and my chat field just jumped. All right, so Patrick asks, what is the easiest way to split long notes into 16th note grid? Want to make long notes into split notes? Is it possible to do it? All right, so we'll show you a trick. So we'll just add a quick instrument track. All right, so let's say I have one long note here. Okay, so I'll just make this larger so everyone can see it. Okay, so if I wanted to split, what I'm going to do is, so we have one long contiguous note. So I'm going to grab this split tool, and then what I want to do, I'll just turn on my snap to grid by hitting the letter J. So we can see that that's turned on, and I'm going to just hold down the Alt key, Alt or Option key, and then click on the long note, and that will automatically just create shorter variations based upon the length. So if I come here, hold down my Alt key, and I wanted to cut it by beats, I could just come right over here, hold down my Alt key, click, and now we could have quarter notes. Or if I wanted to do 16th notes, again, just kind of zoom in, 30-second notes, whatever interval that you cut the particular note at. So let's say if I come here and Alter Option, click with the scissors tool on the note, and then that will evenly divide the notes from just one long note. So I remember Hans Zimmer telling me that was his favorite scoring technique, and then he could just come up with different melodies. So. Great, so we have Chris Ibbotson saying greetings to everyone. Thanks for joining us today. See, John Koskian says that file naming tip will make singer-songwriting projects a breeze. So yeah, it comes in handy. You realize how important naming conventions can be in production. Okay, so Chris asks, the quantized grid lines in the audio editor, can the lines color be changed to make more visible, or can I change the background? I find it hard to locate the correct area and preferences to do what I want. Okay, so let's say I'll just drag a loop in so we can see. Okay, so let's say, all right, so say if I was doing kind of audio warping, all right, so let's do like hit point editing here. So if you wanted to change kind of the background, if you go to preferences, you could go to user interface to color schemes, and then you'll see editor area background. And then you could just kind of change this. So let's say we'll move it, make it brighter. So let's say we'll just do that. So now as we want, so if you wanted to do some stuff like, okay, let's do audio warping at this point. We could just kind of see the grid lines, and let's come here. And so I will also, one thing that a lot of people miss if you're in version 12 is to actually turn the grid line on here. So if we have this set to for bars and beats to be our primary display, make sure that you have the grid line turned on. So that way, as you kind of zoom in, you can see the grid. So, and let's take a look at that with the default preference. So you can see kind of the white grid, but just make sure that if you don't have this turned on, it will seem like it's very subtle, but as you kind of zoom in, you should be able to see the particular grid right there with that little icon. It looks like a hashtag or number symbol. All right, so you see, so Robert Higgins says import video file, nothing happens to video file is MP4. Am I missing a codec? Shows my MP4 files. Click on the file, nothing happens. So again, make sure that you have like that, so we come over here to the video support, because, video files, MP4s aren't like standard audio WAV files that are universally played. So at this point, you could just say, look at, so, if it's going to be an MP4, you need to have the H.263 or H.264 codec, which are kind of the most popular. So make sure it's that particular codec with an MP4 container. See, Mahan just says, can't believe I couldn't figure that out on my own. So John Costigan says there are 1 million little details in Cubase. Only Greg knows them all. So I don't know them all, and I'm still learning stuff in Cubase all the time, which is a great thing after all these years. But it does keep me employed, all those little things. All right, so we have a question. How do I get all the drums in a MIDI track to have separate tracks? Okay, so let's come over here and go to my jump off project. Okay, so the trick is, let's say I have my horrible drum pattern here. Okay, so let's say this is my drum pattern. What I want to do is we'll select the event, go to MIDI and choose dissolve part, and we'll say separate pitches, and we'll say process. And now we'll have kick, hi-hat, tambourine, triangle, snare, snap, all on their own individual tracks, just like that. All right, so you see a question, is there a way to copy a volume curve to another clip's event envelope in case of vocal layering? I don't think so, but let's go ahead and give it a try.
I feel the way.
Okay, so let's say if I have my volume curve here. Okay, let's see if we could be maybe clever and see if it's in the project browser. I don't think that we can do it, but let me just try this. All right, so let me try one other method. So let's see if we put these into a folder track. And see if we put group editing on. I've never tried this. No, it's going to be just for that one particular event. So I don't know of a way to do that for the volume curves. Sorry about that. All right. So we see, please, how can I add my artwork image to my track in Cubase or project? All right. So let's say we wanted to add an image here. So if you click just, you'll see as this gets bigger, this little square. So if you double click there, we can see that you get all sorts of wonderful instruments, which just happen to be Yamaha instruments, coincidentally, but there's also user instruments that you could have, and you could just direct it to particular graphics picture file, and you could just simply at that point have your own pictures directly there. So once again, just double click on the track picture icon and then click on user, and then you could load up your own user images right there. All right, so you see it's question when it's about the video. It says it's becoming a real pain having to convert all my video projects before I can edit the audio. Maybe Cubase can import .mp4 files on the fly in the future. So, basically it's, realize that, it's not a particular MP, it's not a particular MP4, isn't one universal file. So there's, could be 10,000 different versions of an MP4 file. So that's what gets to be problematic. So maybe if you just, do a batch conversion, once you find kind of the right codec and container type, that you should be fine. All right. Guess people like the little drum beat I did. All right. Called it a Greg Groove. All right. Thanks for the kind words especially coming from Pablo, our drummer extraordinaire. All right, so we have Spike Williams who's joining from a very wet Wales. Thanks for being on. All right, wonderful to see Brianna from Youngstown. Thanks for joining us. Great to see you back on the live streams. All right, so we see from Birol Baskafa. Hello, Greg. Did you see my question? I don't remember it, but please feel free to ask again. Sometimes as people ask questions, maybe if they run out of characters, it may just not show up in the chat field, or if someone else sees it, if they want to enter in the question again. Sorry about that. Let's see, John Koskian just says his music history professor told him we have about 1% of classical music written throughout history. Just imagine. So I would doubt it's even 1%. You know, how many great pieces were just like songs that were just played. Luckily, people like Bartok would take, you know, different folk music and use that as part of his compositions to preserve them. All right, so we have Alex checking in from the Netherlands. All right, so I see from Alex asks, it's probably a stupid question, but can you buy color schemes somewhere? So I think if you go to Chris Selim's YouTube channel, that he has some that you could download. So, you know, I'm not sure if there's a lot that are floating around. But you could, you know, check out Chris's YouTube channel. I think it's produced like a pro. And I'm sure if you go to the Cubase Nation Discord, that there's a lot of color schemes floating around. I'm sure that if you offered to pay someone who created one, that they would take your money. So. All right, so we see from Michael Teams that Pablo is finishing drums on a new song that needs a bass part. Am I available? Yes. Please feel free to send it over. Love to play bass on it. All right, so we have Rodrigo checking in from Portugal. Thanks for joining. All right, so we see from Tony ST, or Tony says, I have a small problem with the render in place functions. Question. When rendering a VST track to audio, and I have a few more MIDI tracks than hardware instruments, during rendering, I hear MIDI tracks from hardware synths playing at a fast pace. I don't know what's causing this. Okay, so I'm just rereading this. So when I'm rendering a VST track to audio, and I have a few more MIDI tracks from hardware instruments. During rendering, I hear MIDI tracks from hardware synths playing at a fast pace. I don't know what is causing this. So the one thing, you know, if it's MIDI tracks, if you have an external hardware instrument that's in the track, it may do the rendering. It may do the render in place in real time. So, you know, check to see if you have, so let's say if I wanted to come here and, you know, we do a render in place. So So, if we come over here to edit, to render in place, if there is a hardware instrument, it might do that in real time. So I don't know if what you're rendering is a hardware instrument or software instruments while you're using an external hardware instrument, but obviously the render, but let me know if, Tony, if it plays back fine after the rendering or if it's just kind of rendering beforehand. And also, so check if you could let me know that. All right, wonderful to see Jean-Marie Horvat on. John Koskins is letting Jean-Marie that he's going to let us know that everyone's saying nice things about him behind his back. All right, so we have a question from Paul Claridge. Hello, Greg. How do I get Groove Agent 5 to play the data that I drag and drop? It keeps playing the last pattern I clicked on. It's not following the drag and drop data I put it on. Okay, so let me just come over. I'll just do a new project here. Glad you could make the live stream, Paul. Okay, so let's say I drag over a pattern. Okay, so now we listen to the pattern here. And I'll just adjust my tempo down a little bit. So this is the pattern playing back from the sequencer. All right, now if I listen to the pattern here. All right, so that sounds like the same pattern. What happens sometimes I see people run into is maybe they copy a pattern out and they have this set to sync to transport. So now both patterns are kind of playing simultaneously. One from the MIDI data that's resident in this event, and one that's playing back inside of Groove Agent from its internal sequencer. So Paul, make sure that you don't have, so let's say if I wanted to just drag this over. So, make sure that you don't have the pattern playing. So if I wanted to drag a fill after and then go into kind of a variation that now that this internal sequencer isn't set to play or follow transport. There's our fill and our variation. So make sure that you don't have like this, the internal like MIDI data playing back directly from the plugin and the MIDI data playing back from a track at the same time. So I usually when I get a question like that, that's kind of what I run into. So. All right, so we have a question from Beverly. If I zoom into a MIDI segment or wave segment, how do I nudge forwards or backwards just a few ticks at a time instead of using my mouse as data info slides off? All right, so let's say, and I'll just drop an audio event in as well that we could see. Okay, so let's say we zoom in here. So let me just reread the question. If I zoom into a MIDI segment, how do I nudge forwards or backwards just a few ticks at a time? So if you wanted to just kind of nudge with the mouse, so let's say, all right, so let me. So often, we could nudge the events, and we could go to the nudge. So if you want to nudge the particular event, what you could do is if we go to the nudge palette here, we could choose to nudge the events, and we could do this, just based on like adapt to zoom. So if we wanted to, physically move the events, we could nudge like the selected event over. So, but if you wanted to just kind of nudge the playhead, let's take a look at that. I think let's look under transport. So we'll say jog left. So let me just assign a keyboard shortcut. And just find a So I'm just going to use jog left, jog right. All right, so let's say if I come, so here we could just kind of use those like the jog key commands. Then you could also just like from the transport here, if you look at the transport, you could just kind of take the play position and be able to move it just by hovering over the time display. So if you say, okay, I just want to go by 16th notes or by measures, by beats, or if you wanted this to be in seconds, you can say, okay, I wanted to nudge, move the playhead by milliseconds or seconds. We could just, use your mouse scroll wheel to do it right there in the transport. So let me know if that makes sense and accomplishes what you want to do. Nick is being evil, just sending Pablo coffee in the middle of a live stream. All right, wonderful to see Kristen Parisi and David Reuter on from Big Tent in Nashville. All right, so we see from Johan Kelber, thanks for the learning experience, Greg. Much appreciated. When I have example of 4-part chord in MIDI piano roll view. I want to select only the top or bottom line of the entire piece. How can I do that? All right, so let's say we have, let me just create some quick chord progression here. All right, so let's say we have this. I'm going to add a quick instrument track. All right, so let's say I want to glue these together. Hold down the Alt or Option key to glue them all. Okay, so let's say we have this. Then we want to select the top or lowest note. So let's go to MIDI to Logical Editor. Let's go to Setup. So I think we could choose to select. And we'll say type is equal to note. And we want to say context variable is a property, I think, is set to is part of the chord. Let me see if that's what I was thinking of. Okay, so we can say is equal to note number and chord. So we can say the lowest chord. So that way we could say now we're going to select the lowest note in the chord, or we could say, when we see note number and chord, 0 would be the root. So let's say if I do 3 at this point, we could select the highest note in the chord. So again, just go to select, type is equal to note, context variable is equal to highest note, or you can say note number in chord. So 0 is root, 1 would be the third, generally 2 would be the fifth, etc. So try that. Okay, reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. And it's so wonderful to see so many new people on the live streams. All right, so we see from Tune Boss, or Tune says Cubase 12 and RX 10 problem, offline processing, sending doesn't work all the time. Any tips? So I don't have a license of that, but generally any VST plugin, should be processed the same way. I think, Isotope has kind of their own maybe their own system for navigating back and forth. But I don't have a license of Isotope to test with, unfortunately. Sorry about that. But any VST plugin should work the same way by design. Okay, so we see Robert Higgins just saying thank you on the panning. All right. All right, so we have a question from Beverly. In the mixer, how do I highlight and tag all channels so I can lower the volume in one go on all channels? Okay, so let's jump back to this project here. So we have numbered channels. All right, so we could just in the mixer. So let's say I'm just going to click in like the field, the area here where we have the metering, and say, okay, I want it, hold down the shift key, and I want to select all of these channels. So that will select all channels, and then you could activate Q-Link or hold down Alt or Option plus Shift, and then you could bring them all up or down proportionally, just like so. So once again, select channel, hold down the shift key, and that will click in the metering area. That will select all, hold down Alt or Option plus Shift, select the Q-Link, and then all the faders will be linked to move them all up or down proportionally. All right, so we see question in Mixer. How do I highlight and tag all? I'm sorry. Could you please explain the frequency spectrum in the stereo output and what to look for to get a more full sound? Thank you. Sometimes after a while, what I would often do is just take a particular project and I'll just revert this. So if I was looking for a full sound, I may just look at, using a tool like the included Supervision plugin. So say if we're just kind of going along here. So I often run this on the control room, but if we go under, we just... So we'll see under Analyzer, Supervision. And then you have under what's called like Spectral Domain. But if you, or go to, so if you want to see like kind of the spectrum curve, and then if you click on these, like say I want to add a different meter below, I could just say let's go to Spectral. So let's say we want a spectrum bar. And maybe I want to add to the right. Kind of a spectrum intensity. And if you want to see what it looks like kind of on a piano keyboard. So these will give you kind of an idea of what frequencies are going on in your particular track. So again, I'll just come here and say, so these will, where you have kind of the more brighter frequencies. So, sometimes it's hard to, I always want to try to think of having a good balance of all of the frequencies for the most part. And, so if you had it EQ'd where there's so much more low end or so much more high end, we could, this is a pretty good indication of what the balance is harmonically of the song. So that's how I would kind of use that to figure out, to make sure that, particular frequencies are all, that you have a good balance of the frequencies, and that will help you to create kind of a full sound. All right, so a question, where do sampler track presets I make go, and how do I properly back them up? So they just go as track presets. So let's say I come over, I want to take a particular, so I'll create a sampler track from that. So as soon as we come right over here, we'll just say, let's make, save a track preset, and we'll call it got your, and then when we go to, let's say under media, we'll go home, we go to user presets, track presets, sampler, and then you could just drag it out and that would be your preset. So that's all you had to do. And then when you have like your track presets, if you go, I believe your track presets that you create will automatically be backed up when you go to edit to your profile manager as well. So they just show up as track presets that are in the sampler category. All right, sorry, my chat field just jumped. Just trying to find my space. Sorry about this. Okay, so I think I'm back close to where I was. All right, so we have from Endred, probably not an easy answer, but when it comes to using quantize on drums, what's the most common setting when playing a swing pattern with a lot of ghost notes? All right, so let's say if we wanted to just come over here and do just a quick swing pattern on drums. So, you know, what I like to do, you know, one thing that I would maybe have you experiment with is utilizing, maybe there is a quantizer plugin. So let's take and I'll show you how we could utilize that. So let's say if I come over and we open up this instance, and I wanted to drag, let's say, a quick pattern over. Okay, so we'll have this pattern. So if you go to MIDI inserts, go to quantizer plugin, and then there is a swing that you could adjust right here. So like you could hear it in the hi-hats especially. So we can now kind of take this. So listen to hi-hats are very mechanical, and now you could also just, if I wanted to let's say I take that particular plugin off. And I wanted to, let's say we go into our quantize function. Here we could say, okay, I want to do my swing. So once we come over here, we could say, let's do our quantize swing and just try different percentages. We'll go kind of extreme here. So let's say we'll do like 80%. And now when I quantize, and let's do like 96%, and you can actually see kind of the hi-hats, which are pretty dead on. So we go to 96% and I hit Q for quantize. So I would maybe, you know, depending on a particular how much swing you want to apply. And the cool thing is, especially if it's like a MIDI drum part, that you could just choose to quantize, like maybe you didn't want to touch the snares, but the hi-hats only. So if that was the case, I could just say, I could only select the hi-hats here. And then when I quantize, it's only going to apply that groove to the hi-hats, but not all of the parts. Whereas if nothing is selected, all of the events can move. So that way you could selectively quantize, you know, individual drum parts if needed. Okay, so a question. Hello, how can I see all automation track at the same time in a track? All right, so let's say I'm just taking this particular track and I'll just do a bunch of automation on it. So let's say we'll come over here. I'll just enable automation. I'm going to adjust my EQ. I want to adjust, make sure I'm on the right track here. Okay, so I wanted to come over here. Let's say, okay, I want to add my compressor and I want to automate. And so I want to adjust my panning. All right, so we have all sorts of lovely automation going on. All right, so one of the things, if I wanted to see all my automation, one is if you go to the automation panel, which is F6, we could say, okay, I want to show used automation. And then that will open up all of the automation in a particular project that you could see. We could also hide all of the automation. So at this point, so from the automation panel, F6, but you could also go to settings and say reveal parameter on write. So let's say I'm in this particular track and now I wanted to automate the volume. As soon as I grab the volume, then the automation line for volume appears. If I go to my envelope shaper and I wanted to adjust and automate this particular parameter, every time I automate a parameter, it automatically shows up. But you could just simply select the track and from the automation panel, just say show used. And then that will open up all the different automation lanes that have been used for that particular project. Let's check, see how we're doing on time. So we're doing pretty well. All right, so we see from a question from Kim, is there a way to save a sampler patch with its associated audio file elsewhere independently of the project it originates from? So let's see if we created a sampler track preset here. All right, so let me just come over here to sampler control. So I think it's still going to be able to access, so, you know, the original audio file would be saved. Let me just add a track preset. All right? So let's say we wanted to have sampler, and just come over to just do it from the right zone media bay here. User preset, track preset, sampler. All right, so as soon as we drag all right, and now let's come over to our pool window. All right, so now let's say we added the got your. Okay, and now let's come up, but I think it's still going to be referencing the same audio file location. Just go to the pool window and see. But it's automatically kind of, the audio files copied in. But let's come over here and so I think it's still going to be maintained in the project folder, the original file. So sorry about that. See, Michael Team says the signature track now is a revelation of the day, probably with the okay. So we just see from G Banny or a tutorial on dynamic EQ, de-essing, and harsh frequencies on vocals, please. All right, so let's say we'll try this and see.
Seventh grade school parking lot, waiting on our yellow coach to ferry us.
Let me just revert this since I added way too many effects on it. All right, so I may not have a lot of harsh vocal files, but let's see if we can.
Just like a long, long time ago. Oh, I remember the day that we wed. Seems like a long, long time ago.
So, one of the things you could, obviously do is if we have like the frequency
EQ.
EQ.
Was no regret right after that Garth Brooks show. You told your daddy and he called.
I'll see if I can add some harshness and then take it away.
Too damn good for any boy that dumb. His soured words are now dead and done. That was a long, long
All right, so say now I wanted to correct
ago.
it with this instance. So kind of look at the frequencies.
Now our two grown daughters are married with kids
And if you,
of their own.
you could put this in listen mode, and as you make adjustments, this way you're only hearing exactly what you're affecting.
It started all of this.
So say, okay, maybe we want to do just a little bit of de-essing.
Seems like a long, long time
And if you
ago.
go to tools, you'll see a de-esser here.
Seems like a long, long time ago.
And then
Seems like
I'll just take it off
long,
loop. Sorry.
long time ago.
So at this point, you
Our
could
first kiss,
find
there
just a
was
particular
no
frequency
regret.
range.
Right after that Garth Brooks show, you told your daddy and he called my mom. Said you were too damn good for any boy that dumb.
So at this point, you can just kind of find particular
His
sibilant
soured words are
frequencies.
now dead and done.
And now if you wanted to
That
do
was a
more
long, long
dynamic EQ, so let's say
time
we're here, and I wanted to take just that
Now our
band.
2 grown daughters are married with kids of their own.
So at this point, when we activate
And I know
dynamic,
your
we could
dad's
just say,
pretty
okay,
happy now, 'cause what began as our first kiss, it started all of
so this way
this.
we're just applying the dynamics only on this particular
Do you
frequency
remember
range.
the day it was a long, long
So we could
time
see
ago.
that as we do that, not only is it doing the EQ, but we could,
I still love you like the day that we met.
that way we could apply just kind of dynamics, and we could have kind of that, that sculpting of the cue and just particular frequencies instead of just being a multi-band, which is going to do kind of just fixed bands. Here we could have different cues and, and be able to kind of dial in, to prevent kind of harsh frequencies on your vocals. All right, so we see from the question from the Studio International, do you know if there's a preset script for the montage keyboard for MIDI remote? Have set one up from scratch inside MIDI remotes. I don't think that there is, because obviously sometimes the controls on a montage are deeply integrated to the internal synth functions. So sometimes people may not want to give that up in order to control, Cubase and different plugin parameters, but you could obviously create your own MIDI remote script for that. All right, wonderful to see Brian Sawyer on from Beulahville, North Carolina. Glad you're able to make it. All right, so we have a question from Pablo. I have a colleague who has installed the Cubase 11 Pro instruments, but they don't appear in the manager. It seems that everything is installed by default. What could be happening? I think if it's in Cubase 12, so I'm not sure if it's in Cubase 11 Pro or in Cubase 12 Pro. So there are some instruments in Cubase 12 from 11 that aren't officially supported, but there's, ways that people have determined that you could probably Google to get the instrument set back in for compatibility reasons. But Pablo, if you could let me know if it's Cubase 11 that they're not finding the particular instrument, or if it's in Cubase 12. Okay, just reading. Read through different comments and questions. All right, so we see from Benny, question, sorry, I asked a question wrong. How do I set up all the drums in a MIDI track to have separate audio tracks? Okay, so if you're doing it within Groove Agent, I'll show you the trick here. Okay, so let's say we're here. All right, so let's say we're playing. We have... All right, so we go to the mixer, and everything is now going to be coming out of one channel. So everything is mixed internally here. But if I wanted to create, and I'll just click here so we see our stereo output. Now when I activate a different output, so let's say I want my snare to go out of output 2, my hi-hat out of output 3. We can see that these are adding buses. So this is like opening the automation lane on the instrument track. And we can see that these are being added. So let's go to overheads. Let's say output 4, output 5 here. Okay, so now everything is being bussed out to separate tracks. So if I wanted my snare, so we can still hear it in the overheads, but if I wanted more direct snare, we could do independent processing. So if I say, okay, I want to EQ the snare. But now let's say if I wanted to render these particular instruments, what we could do is just come over, and let's say if I have this pattern in my project window, so I drag it over. Now that these are all being sent to different outputs, I go to Edit, to Render in Place, and we go to the render settings. And here I just want to have the channel settings selected, and I hit Render. And now as we do this, my hi-hat, my kick, and snare will all be kind of individual audio tracks. So as soon as you send them to the different outputs, then you could render in place, and that will automatically just kind of take those particular tracks and render them as audio files for you. So let me know if that's helpful, Benny. All right, we have a question from Vinny Sabatino. Glad you can make it today. How to record Roland TD50X using USB only directly into Cubase. I just don't get it. So realize that if you're using, I think that's the electronic drum kit, the TD50X. So if you're playing, if you're playing an instrument, realize that you could, the USB is probably just transmitting MIDI data. So we could take a USB cable, it's connected to the computer. You would need to, if you wanted to record the internal sounds, we need to set it up as a MIDI track because it's not a virtual instrument. We would add the MIDI track, set the correct MIDI input where it's connected, and output where the MIDI output is going back to the instrument. And then somehow you have to get the audio because the tone is not being generated over the USB. It's probably being generated inside the device. And you have to get the audio out of the device into the computer. So in the older days, people would just use mixers and listen to all their external modules, drum machines, synthesizers in mixers, and then blend that with the audio. But a lot of people don't want to buy, mixers with 64 inputs and stuff like that. So one other thing you do is if you go to your audio connections, if you have available inputs, we could create an external instrument, and then just come over here. You want to click on Add External Instrument. We'll call it a TD50X. And then once we have the TD50X set up, you want to tell where it's connected into your audio interface. Once that has been done, come over and add an instrument. Now we could treat it like a virtual instrument under external instruments. But you have to have, so realize that the TD50X, and if some instruments will generate and function as an audio interface, but realize that you can't run that interface with your other interface at the same time. So often that gets to be kind of a moot point. Like if you only had that, it's fine. But if you want to incorporate that with another, with another audio interface, which is very typical, then you can't run two interfaces effectively at once. So you just hook it up as an external MIDI device, and then if you wanted to take the outputs of it, connect it, the analog outs or digital outs into your audio interface and connect that and define it as an external instrument, then you could be able to kind of treat it much like a virtual instrument. And that's one of the, now if you want the instrument just to play back sounds in something like Groove Agent, what you could do is once you go to the instrument pad, come right over here, and then you could just have the mapping set up. You'll have this little icon here for use hardware controller mapping. And you'll probably see E-drum controller. So try selecting that. And that should do like the mapping for the hi-hats, the kicks, and snares. So if you just want to use it for sounds for inside of Cubase and use the drum set as an electronic player or a controller, electronic kit to play back sounds in Cubase, you could just come right over here and just set the MIDI input from your TD50X and wherever you want the MIDI going to a particular instrument. All right. All right, so we have a question. What's the easiest way to change an instrument on a track? Example, Hallian to pad shop. Thanks for a great question. All right, so if it is a MIDI track, we could come over here and just send the MIDI data directly to any other device. Now, if it's an instrument track, so say, okay, I want this. So say I go to my Hallian Sonic SE, and I have drawn some notes in. And I want that to now play back on Pad Shop. I would just add a Pad Shop instrument. This is probably the easiest way to do it because instrument tracks are kind of tied directly to that particular instrument, and copy it down. And now we could play back those particular sounds inside of Pad Shop. So as we come here. So it's probably easiest with if you have MIDI tracks, you could just change the output port. With instrument tracks, load up the instrument, and then you could just copy the part down, and then once you're there, just choose to remove the selected track, and that will unload the virtual instrument from taking up memory and processing. All right. See, Jeweler DeRocket just says, thanks to Jazz Dude for his amazing work he's doing with this community. So I'll definitely echo that. We appreciate all of his wonderful support. And also, Jazz Dude, let me know if you got I sent the email again. I saw on the last live stream that you may not have gotten your prize from the 250th. And I sent an email over the weekend. And if you could just let me know if you got that email, so make sure you get your prize. And I'll follow up for our Christmas giveaway tomorrow with staff in Hamburg. All right, reading through comments. All right. Okay, so I see from Tony, and this is kind of a follow-up, says, I'm just rendering one VST instrument track to audio and hearing MIDI tracks of hardware instruments in the background at the same time. So let me know if the hardware instruments are actually included in the rendered file or if it's just playing back during the rendering process. Okay, so we have a question. Is Elgato Stream Deck compatible with Cubase 12? So yeah, I use one for my personal Cubase setup, and I have like all the menu functions mapped out. So you could do that. You may need to download like a MIDI utility, and that will basically allow you to for each button, so the Stream Deck can control Cubase via MIDI commands if you have a MIDI utility or just by mimicking keyboard shortcut combinations. But either of those will work with Cubase. Okay, so you see further clarification from Tony. Just as with the MIDI tracks of the hardware instruments, nothing happens. I just hear them while rendering as if they are also rendering, but it's not the case. I currently have 2 external synths that are only connected via USB cables to the computer. They are added in Cubase as external instruments separately in the external instruments field. So you might hear it. And it could also be you might be hearing it as a result of your audio interface if those inputs are set to always be monitored through like the mixer applet of your audio interface. But if it's not actually going into the rendered file, then I think you're fine. But also check to make sure that the audio routing is correct in your external instrument configuration. All right, so we have DJ by P. Dipper in the house from Miami. All right, just reading through. All right, so we have a question from Jose Antonio Gazo. Yesterday, I found out there are sampler tracks in Cubase. What are they? What are they used for? So, what you could do is just kind of take, let's say you're playing, different. Let's say you have loops or audio, and you're coming over here. And let me just. So say, okay, I'm just here. So say I have this one sample here. So what I could do now is just come over here. Let's create a sampler track. And now I could just come right over and play that audio. So I could take any audio file that's in my project and drag it to the particular sample track. So let's say if I'm here, I want to take this loop and drag it down. I can now just play this just like a built-in sampler. So it's super fast and easy. Just drag and drop, and then you could immediately start playing and performing with triggering digital audio files for really creative work. All right, so we see Jose Antonio asks, what is the secret of the universe? Make great music with Cubase, and everything will be good, and you'll have eternal happiness. And Jazz Dude also says 42. It's the first thing that came to my mind. All right, so we see, can I send USB input channels out from a multi-channel USB desk, Big 6, directly to Cubase effects, and then route those out of Cubase outputs back to 2 USB channels on the desk? So I'm not sure if the Big 6 desk would allow that. So, I mean, Cubase can send out the effects. So let's say if we added an effects channel, your desk may prevent it, based on. So once we're here, let's say if I say, okay, I want this effect to go out of outputs 3 and 4 of my desk. So we'll go to audio connections. I'll say outputs, and let's make a stereo bus, and we'll call this out 3, 4. Okay, so now I could take the effect and go into. So let's say I have my effects channel. Let's see where. Okay, so let's say we're here. So instead of sending this out, I could send this out to outputs 3 and 4. But you may have to, there's a chance it could create a feedback loop in your desk. But you would need to be able to send, so on that effects channel, so the effects channel can be sent out to any output that you have on your audio interface, but getting from your audio interface on inputs, you could just you could try to come over here on the input channel, and on the input channel where it's connected. So let's say we have input channels, and we'll go to our audio connections. We'll go to inputs, and we'll add a stereo bus here. And then at this point on the input channel of this stereo bus, that's where we could, just have that particular effect. So let's say, okay, on this as an insert, we can, come over to, or just go to the send. So you might be able to run it as an insert on the input channels, but it may create a feedback loop. And there's a good chance that your desk won't have that type of routing. Okay, so we have a question from Dusan Dropney. How to define chord inversions in a chord track? All right, so let's say we have a chord track. All we have to do is just say, okay, if I wanted this to be like a C with a G, so what we can do is just put the bass note. So we can say, okay, I want a C over a G chord, or a C or with the E in the bass. So this is how you could define different inverted chords. So just the last column, just make sure that you have that set, and that would set the chord inversions for you. All right. So I see a question. I have a brand new M-Audio Oxygen Pro MIDI controller that Cubase 10.5 doesn't receive MIDI notes from. It's seen in the studio setup. All right. So if it's not, so when you have a MIDI controller, just come here and make sure that when you're doing this, that you have, that you see the MIDI input here. Now, it could be that the depending on the MIDI controller, that it could transmit MIDI out of the USB port or out of the 5-pin DIN MIDI connection. So it could be that maybe if you have it connected via USB, that the MIDI is being transmitted out of the 5-pin DIN cable. So one thing that you can do is, if you have a particular MIDI track here, go to the MIDI inserts, and we could see that if we come over, you'll see a MIDI monitor. And then as you hit different MIDI notes, you'll see it just automatically show up on the MIDI monitor directly there. So make sure that you have it transmitting out of how it's connected to your computer. So that would probably, you may have it connected via USB, and the computer sees it as a USB device, but it may still be transmitting MIDI out of the 5-pin kind of traditional DIN port. All right, we see Gareth is on, so we have the full Hot Mess contingent on. Great to see you. All right, so we see from Mark Chiambo, in Cubase 12, question, how do I get to see all my audio inputs and the information pane at the top project window? I used to have this info, but it disappeared and can't seem how to bring it back. So, you can see your audio connections here. Now, if you have an audio track selected, so let's say we come here to a particular audio track, we could see all of your available inputs listed here in the inspector. So maybe like this inspector tab got closed and another inspector is open. But once you see it here, we could just see all of the input and output routings directly here from the main inspector tab at the very top. So let me know if that was where you're thinking of seeing it. All right, so we have a question. Is there a native way to change the phase relationships between tracks apart from the phase button in the mixer? All right, so if we have, just take this and let's duplicate tracks. All right, so let's say we zoom in here. So we could select an event, and right from the info line, there's an invert phase function that you don't have to access the mix console for. So right from the top here in the info line, you just click on the invert phase. You could also just come over to audio, to processes, and you could do invert phase on a particular file if you wanted to as well. And you could do it kind of offline, but probably faster is just to come right over here and invert the phase just like that. See, Gareth is saying the frequency phase correlation meter is extremely useful. Yes, it's a great addition. All right. So we see a question. Sometimes I have some peculiar track on my project that gets stuck to their own size, even if I select all the tracks and resize them equally. That one problematic track will get to reset its own size when I unselect it. So I've never had like a track height lock or not lock for me. So, I mean, that's always been adjustable. Let me see if the track is disabled, if it still does that. So let me just come over. So let's say if we disable the selected track, so it's still resized. Let's see if we freeze the track, if that makes a difference in size. So it seems like it's still able to be resized. So, but if you have a particular project that's doing, you can share it with me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. My chat field just jumped. Okay, so we see a question. Why does my insert plugin sometimes gray out when loading them, waves, as well as my Steinberg stock standard plugins? Is my RAM not sufficient? I have a Mac Mini with 8... sorry, shut off my alarm. I have a Mac Mini, 8 gigs, M1, run Windows 12. So it's probably that you have the constrained delay compensation on. So with this on... and this is this little button in the bottom left-hand corner of the transport. With this activated, what it's going to do is basically bypass plugins that are causing a lot of latency. So that way you could track through the system without a lot of imposed latency, which can really affect the recording experience. So at this point, just try to make sure that the constrained delay compensation is disabled. And then those plugins will probably become active. Okay, just reading through. Yeah, and I saw that for the track height that's always bigger, there is a preference. And I saw Jazz Dude mention this, and it's a great point. I'll show it on another project so it's easier to see. But there is an enlarge selected track setting. So if a track is selected, so let's say these are all roughly the same height, but if you go to edit and enable place a check next to enlarge selected track, and this one is larger, anytime that you do select a track, that will show up and be larger. So also try to go to edit and uncheck enlarge selected track. Okay, so we see a question. Can you freeze frame a spectral analysis image? Okay, so let's say we're playing along here. Let's get to my control room. Let me just see if there's... So if you just kind of click right here, let's say on the spectrum curve, you could just freeze. You could pause the measurement right there. So let's say if we go to like our spectrum bar, we'll add. So now if we come here, we could just freeze. So whatever one is active. So if you have this one is active, you could freeze it. And if you wanted to freeze this one, since that's the active window, you can now just choose to freeze just like that. And so give that a try. So just right up in the upper left-hand corner, just pause. And if you wanted to do that for all, just hold down Alt or Option key, and then you could do it for all of your meters at once. All right, so we see Ryamis says, first time here in the live stream, do we just ask potential questions? So yeah, all you have to do is just ask questions, type them in, or email them directly to clubcubase@steinberg.de. So we have a question. Hi, Greg. A few words where else sidechain can be applied, only on compression and equalizer. You could also do some stuff. Like I had a question that was mailed in, and this will be our good segue into those particular questions of how to do, like someone wanted to know how to do like a side chain of a reverb on a particular, like on a voice. They'd send a video how to do it in a different program that's a little convoluted. So I wanted to come here. Let's say we have a voice. So I'm just going to do this as a compression, but let's go ahead and just listen to the voice. I started losing sight my place. So say we have a lot of reverb when she's singing. What dimension am I in? And reverb afterwards. But let's say I wanted to in the end. Just have I wanted the reverb to be minimized while she's singing, and when she's not singing for the reverb to kind of pop out. So when we do this, what I'm going to do is on the effects return channel. So every time we go to an effects return channel, that could be up to 16 different plugins. And I'm just going to activate a compressor. And I'm going to go to the sidechain input and tell it to go to the vocal track. So I want the sidechain for the compressor to kick in, and we're going to utilize the sidechain from the actual track. So now when we do this, the sidechain is not compressing the actual vocal. It's just compressing because it comes after the reverb. So now we'll listen to it. I started losing sight of my place. So we see the compression. What dimension am I in? So she sees, as soon as she stops singing, in the end, the reverb opens up. End. So if we kind of took this off, way too much reverb kind of all the time. I feel the weight. So now I turn on this track with the side chaining. I feel the weight. And if we wanted the attack to be, the release to be longer, we could just simply come. So that's another way that you may not think, and people will do side chaining on delays, side chaining on reverbs all the time, just to kind of keep the vocal intelligibility intact. All right, so I know we had some other questions. Let's go ahead and get to those before we run out of time. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. Hope everyone's learned a new tip or trick, and if you have, make sure that you do hit the like button. All right, so we had a question. How do you do an 808 bass glide in Cubase? All right, so let's take a look at this. So let's say I have just kind of a typical 808 bass sound, and I want to do, so a lot of times people will try to do, so I just loaded this into the sampler track. So we go to our sampler control, and here we could do, we could set our pitch bend range amount. So if I want to do like an octave with my pitch bend, but we could do some more creative use when we come over here. So let's say, but if we wanted to also come over here, we could place this into monophonic mode. So as soon as, and once we do this, we'll go into the pitch section, and then we'll see a glide. So let's say I want to set this to maybe like a faster glide time. So let's say, okay, let's make it a little longer. Now, one of the other cool things you could do is put this into legato mode. So we see that when I do this and I play a different note, it restarts the sample. So I hit a note, it plays a sample from the beginning. But now I could also put it into legato mode. So when I play, it's going to continue playing in the sample throughout. When I hit the same pitch, it's not going to restart the sample from the beginning. So let's say I'll do this a little faster. So I want to do like typical kind of. So just kind of taking that in, and you can place it into monophonic mode and put it into legato as well. All right. So we got this question from Jean-Marie Horvat. I have a question. Is there a way to not use lanes? So I guess if you wanted to, let's jump back to our comping. So lanes are obviously a great method for doing a lot of different types of tasks. But if we take this event, so let's say we'll take this event, and we'll just take this one, and I'm going to convert this. I think we go to audio, and let's say events to part. So now when I double click, instead of dealing with lanes, we can now come over and just kind of select different parts that we want to hear. So you don't, so if I wanted to just kind of grab, the comp tool, we could just, I think we may have to just, like the comp tool may work differently here since we're in parts. But here we could, if you wanted to just say, okay, I want to take this and I wanted to mute like other events, we could say, okay, now I wanted to cut here and I wanted to hear just this particular event. So as we would cut, we could just say, okay, I wanted this to be muted and this to be heard. So we could kind of have different ways of kind of assembling audio using the part editor. So again, select the event and then come over here and then go to the part. You want to say events to part. And then when you double click, you could do kind of audio assembly tasks directly here instead. So you can say, okay, I don't want to hear this part. I want to hear this part instead. So give that a try, Jean-Marie. Let me know if that's what you kind of want to accomplish. Okay, we covered that one already. All right, so we had a question mailed in. I'm trying to use a Roland R70 drum machine as a MIDI controller in Cubase 12 Pro. When I hit the pads in the R70, I can see the note numbers in Cubase MIDI controller setup. However, I can't find a way to change the MIDI note numbers for the individual pads or sounds in the Roland. How can I make settings in Cubase so that when I hit a pad on a Roland, the note number is mapped to the desired note number? For example, if I hit a pad and get MIDI note number 5, I would like to play note number 60. All right, so let's say we'll just jump over back to all right, so let's say we have Groove Agent set up. Okay, so I come here and let's say I wanted to just remap different MIDI notes. All right, so we have this set up. So let's say I want to take my D1. So what I'm going to do is just when we come over to our drum map, we're going to say, let's go to a drum map setup and let's create a new map. Okay, and we'll give it a name. So we'll say R70, I think was the model. Okay. All right, so we're going to select the R70 and let's go into, once we've selected a drum map, we could double click and go directly into our events here. So let's say I go to D1 and we have an in note. This is the note that's coming in from the controller. And now what I want to do is just take the out note, the O note here, and then I could remap it to whatever sound I want just by kind of clicking. So we say D1, I want this to be. So that's all you have to do is just, so again, go to the drum map setup. You'll see it here. Create a new drum map. You'll click on functions to new map, give it a name, select that. And then once you go into the drum editor, you'll see your in note, and then you'll see, so just taking the same exact MIDI pitch, and then you could remap it at will. And once you save it as a drum map, you should be able to open that up in other projects afterwards. All right, so we had a question from Joe from Rochester. And just dealing with automation. If I have two, all right, I thought I would ask you questions for tomorrow's live stream. I know you've helped me in the past, but now with the logical editors been updated, I thought there may be an improvement with this function. If I have 2 points selected on volume automation line, is there a way to trim or increase automation by exactly 1 dB increments using a keyboard shortcut or using the logical editor? Okay, so let's come over here to, let's say, our automation. So let's say we have automation points. All right, so if I had like these two nodes selected, let's go to our project logical editor. So go to our project menu to project logical. Okay. So what we want to do here is, I'll just start from scratch. So let's say I want to take, so we'll say transform, and we want to take media type is equal to automation. And then we will say automation property is set to event is selected. Now in our event transform actions, we'll say trim, and then we'll say increment volume in dB. So we'll say 1 dB. So now that we have our selected automation, I'm going to come over here and just say apply, and that's going to take the selected automation points and raise them by 1 dB. So if I wanted to select multiple events, we could raise all those by 1 dB, and if we choose to decrement, we could also choose to decrement the selected nodes by 1 dB or increase by 1 dB. All right, so second part of the question. Is there also a way to accomplish this when I have a selection of my volume automation selected using the range selection tool? In the past, you showed me how to use this in moving 10% increments. I also have the new improvements will make this function better. So if we wanted to take just, let's say if we have, so we could select the range tool. And, the range tool with automation, we could just come over here and adjust just by grabbing the center point, and we could adjust like that. But if you want it to be exactly 1 dB, let's create another logical editor preset for this. So let's come back over to our project logical editor. Let's do setup. So I'll still choose transform. And here I want to say, all right, so with this, with the range tool, we don't necessarily select the automation, but I'm going to just create a way to where the range selection is done, that before we go, we'll just set the left and right locators based on the range selection. So I'm going to go into pre area, locators to selection. So now anytime that I run over here, the locators will automatically follow my range selection. So now that I have my range selection, I could select the automation that's going to be just in there. So let's say I have not only volume automation, but mute automation. All right, so let's say I want to take the automation within that particular range, and at that point decremented or incremented by 1 dB. So what we need to do now is to come over here and let's insert, and we'll say property is set to parent object is selected. So now if I have the parent object selected, regardless if this is open or not, I could come over, and if I did this right, let's see if I, okay, so let me select a range. Okay, and I may have done this as a preset already, so let me see. Okay, so here we're going to say, again, to transport locators to selection, media type is equal to automation, and a property is parent object is selected, and we're going to choose position inside the cycle. So let's say we come here, my range is here, so I'm going to now hit apply, and we can see that that is raising the automation within the selected event. But if we had something like panning automation, we could come over here. So let's say we want to do standard pan left to right. Okay, so let's say now when I do this, all of my automation will be affected. So let's say I move my range selection here. So now it's doing it to my panning and my volume automation. So if I wanted to restrict it to just volume automation, we'll say media type is equal to automation, and then I'm going to insert name, and we'll say contains or equals volume. So now we have our automation here. So I see panning and volume automation. So now I could just increment or decrement just the volume automation without affecting anything else. So you'd want to have the original track selected. So if I come here, I have this track selected. I run the macro or the project logical editor, and at this point we can see that it's gone down. So if we choose to increment, and this way it doesn't have to be open or selected. So now that we choose to increment the values, I'll do this a number of times, and we'll see for that particular range when we open up the automation that that range of the automation has increased. So give that a try, Joe, and let me know if that makes sense for you. All right, so let's go back to our live questions. Thanks for all the wonderful questions that everyone has sent. Let's see if we can get some more answered as we go along. All right, just reading through comments. All right, so we see, has anyone been able to figure out how to make Cubase in a live setting work where it plays linearly until you press a MIDI command and make it jump to where you want it to be? All right, so let's say we'll have a quick project here. So let's say, okay, I'm playing this and I'm just going to set up markers. Okay, so let's say I have a marker here and a marker here. Okay, so what I want to do is just to hit a MIDI command. So we could do this like in our MIDI remote. So just come over here. Let's get to, come over here to different tracking. All right, so let's say I'm here and I want to take this particular button, and when I start, I want it to go to marker 3. So we'll be kind of playing along. So I will just come right over here. Let's go to key commands. All right, to marker. Or I think it's going to be maybe under transport. All right, so I'll just say to marker 3, and let's apply that mapping to that particular function. So while we're playing linearly, I'll just come here. Then I could just hit the button and go right to marker 3. So you could just remap stuff. So let's say you're just playing linearly. And then if you had to set up as cycle markers as well, I could just say, okay, let's take this particular range and let's add a cycle marker. So let's say I want to take this button and I'll say to cycle marker 1. So now I'll just hit this button and it'll just take you directly to cycle marker 1. You could have it automatically loop as well. So as soon as it gets to the end, it'll just and let's say I want it to go to marker 3 now. I'll just hit the button again. Then you could just navigate exactly as you want. So you could, go to different markers very easily. All right, so All right, so we have a question from Ronald Boykin. Hi, Greg. I create MIDI clips to make loops, but when I try to export them as loops, the loop menu is grayed out. So when you export a MIDI loop, so say if I come here, it has to be a virtual instrument for MIDI loops. So if it is a MIDI track, because the MIDI loop will pull in the virtual instrument that it's assigned to. So let's say if I added a MIDI track here and I copied this event down, that when we go to export or file to export, MIDI loop isn't turned on, but when we have a MIDI event that's routed to a virtual instrument, we go to file, export, that MIDI loop will be activated there. So make sure that it is on a virtual instrument, like on an instrument track, because that way when you pull in a MIDI loop, it's going to load up the appropriate instrument so it plays back correctly. Okay. All right, so just reading through comments. So Gerald Ely says rendering to the different outputs of Groove Agent, and he loves it. All right. All right, so we see Dennis Ramirez just says Cubase is best. He just finished mixing a cover instrumental using Cubase, and thanks always as a tutorial. All right, so we see, hi Greg, I still cannot get spectral layers to show up in Cubase Pro 9. Can you recommend any troubleshooting? I have registered both. So I don't think Cubase Pro 9 has ARA extensions capability. So I think that came in version 10 or maybe 10.5 or 11. So, but I don't think Cubase Pro 9 had Spectral had ARA extensions, which is what's used for like to integrate spectral layers. All right, so we see VariAudio just says, thanks for your tip. The problem was that the project had a different sample rate than the audio interface. It's nice when it's an easy solution like that. So Gareth is writing a song in Cubase as he's on the Hangout. So. Okay, so we see from Gerald Ely, Greg, in your VST pull-down menu, it looks like you have Groove Agent kits listed. How do you do that? So let's say if I come here to, so let's say if I go to media, what you could do is just come over here and go to VST instruments. And then if you go to Groove, if you select Groove Agent SE here, you could see kind of all of the different kits that are available, all the different libraries. So let me know if that's what you were talking about. Okay, Gareth wants everyone to hit the like button. Okay, so we see from Kai Nunert, hey there, I have a problem that I cannot hear sounds in the media bay and I write, but when I go to open the actual media bay as a window, I can pre-listen to sounds. What is wrong? So make sure that you have, when you, let's say we jump back to loops and samples and we are in, that when it's selected that you have kind of play. So you can have autoplay. So if you don't see this on, make sure that the autoplay button is selected. So, but if that's turned off, then you just don't hear anything. So with autoplay enabled, then you should be able to kind of preview easily like that. Okay, so we see a question. Hey there, I ran into a problem where I was recording something and panning it. The problem is when I put that audio files into a group, the panning gets lost. Don't want to add 25 times my reverb. So probably what it is, as, let's say we had our guitars, let's say they each had a reverb going on. So let's say we'll go to sends here quickly and see. I'll just add. So we'll have a stereo effects channel, let's say for our guitars. So we're all nice and copacetic here. So if these tracks are added to so when you go to add a group, when we do this, make sure that your group configuration is not set to mono. So if it's set to mono, then you kind of lose everything. But if we have the group as set to stereo, so we go to add a group channel to the selected channels. So make sure that the group itself is in stereo, and then all of your panning will be carried over. So if the group itself is set to mono, then you'll lose kind of panning capabilities. Okay, so we see from Jack C says, I'm happy to announce that I'm switching from Ableton to Cubase. I played with Cubase and absolutely love it, but can't figure out one thing. How do I put two synths on the same track? All right, so if we start with an instrument rack, so let's say I will come here, let's go to new project. All right, so I'm going to add an instrument rack. So let's say, okay, I have retro log here. All right, so now I added a MIDI track. So now when we come over, so if I had another instance of retro log, so we could do this from MIDI tracks. So let's say I'm going to add another instrument rack, and let's add a pad shop. So if I wanted these two to be layered, one is you could just come over and put these into a folder. So if you move it to a folder track, you could close the folder, and now both sounds, both sounds will be able to be played. So as soon as we enable the folder. Now, if you don't want to put it into a folder, we could also just, if we start with MIDI tracks going to a rack, I could say, let's take this retro log and go to a MIDI send. And we want to stack this to, and at this point, we'll activate the send and send it to pad shop. And now if I wanted to just even do just arpeggios on one, then we could layer and have everything on one track. All right, so we're out of time. I want to thank everyone for the wonderful questions, and we'll see everyone back on Friday starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Thank you so much.